They demanded $88,000 for rules. I never agreed to my ranch, my fight. After years of living amid the relentless noise, chaos, and endless deadlines of city life, I finally took the leap I had dreamed about for decades. I bought my own ranch, not just a piece of land, but a sanctuary, a slice of freedom tucked away in a quiet rural county. The moment I drove down the long dirt road leading to the property, I felt a wave of relief sweep over me, a sensation I hadn't realized I'd been craving. The ranch sprawled across rolling hills dotted with wildflowers, golden in the late afternoon sun. A red barn stood proudly in the distance, its paint slightly faded but charming, echoing the memories of old Western movies I had adored as a child. Horses grazed lazily in their paddocks, occasionally flicking their tails at flies or lifting their heads to watch me as I approached. The scent of fresh hay, damp earth, and pine trees filled the air, a perfume of calm that no city could ever replicate. I parked my truck near the farmhouse, a modest yet inviting building with a wraparound porch. Its wooden floors creaked under my boots, each sound somehow comforting, a stark contrast to the cold, impersonal steel and concrete of my apartment in the city. I wandered through the rooms, envisioning the life I would build here. Mornings spent sipping coffee while watching the sunrise over the hills, evenings with a fire crackling in the fireplace, the occasional neighborly visit, and long, peaceful nights under a sky filled with stars. I signed the final stack of legal documents in the small office tucked off to the side of the barn. Each signature felt like a key turning, unlocking a future that was mine and mine alone. I checked the property lines, wandering past fences, stone markers, and the creek that cut lazily through the land. Every corner held potential. A vegetable garden here, a small orchard there, a riding trail winding through the hills. As I stood on the hilltop, overlooking my new domain, the wind brushing against my face, I realized the full weight of what I had accomplished. This wasn't just a property purchase. It was a statement to myself. I was taking control, stepping off the treadmill of urban life and embracing a slower, richer existence. I could almost hear the land whispering promises of peace, of space to dream, of life lived on my own terms. That evening, as I sat on the porch with the last light fading behind the hills, I felt a sense of anticipation that tingled through my veins. The ranch was more than just land. It was a blank canvas, waiting for my stories, my struggles, my triumphs. I was ready to carve out a life that was entirely, unmistakably mine. Little did I know, the serenity of this dream ranch would soon be tested in ways I could never have imagined. But for now, under the open sky, with the distant neigh of horses as my soundtrack, I allowed myself to simply breathe and savor the feeling of home. A week after settling into the quiet rhythm of ranch life, I noticed a white envelope in the mailbox. The kind of envelope that feels ordinary at first glance, yet carries the potential to change everything. The paper was crisp, the edges sharp, and the embossed letters spelled out a name I didn't expect to see: the HOA. My heart sank slightly before I even opened it. I'd hoped to leave bureaucracy behind when I left the city, but apparently it had followed me here. I tore the envelope open, my fingers trembling just a fraction. Inside was a single sheet of paper, typed in cold, formal language, and at the top in bold letters was a number that made my stomach drop: $88,000. Back dues, fees, penalties, retroactive charges for violations of rules I had never been told about, never signed, and certainly never agreed to. As I read the letter, disbelief gave way to a creeping anger. The HOA claimed my property, my dream ranch. The culmination of years of hard work and savings wasn't just mine. According to them, it was part of a community with strict standards I hadn't even known existed. They argued that certain structures I'd built, my fencing layout, even the way I had positioned my barn, violated regulations that had supposedly been in place for decades. And because ignorance, they said, wasn't an excuse, I owed them tens of thousands of dollars immediately. I dropped the letter onto the kitchen table, my mind racing. $88,000. That wasn't just a sum. That was nearly the entire equity of the ranch. My pulse quickened, a mixture of fear and disbelief coursing through me. I had left the city to find freedom, yet here it was a legal iron hand reaching across state lines, trying to strangle that freedom before it had even taken root. I paced the living room, staring out at the horses grazing lazily in the paddocks. Their calm demeanor mocked my rising anxiety. How could they claim I agreed to anything? How could a set of rules I'd never seen suddenly become law? The letter suggested meetings I had never attended, notifications I had never received. It was bureaucracy at its most suffocating, a perfect storm of arrogance and entitlement. After a long silence, I sat back in my chair, gripping the edges of the table. This wasn't just about money. It was about principle. My ranch, my sanctuary, was being held hostage by rules that existed only in the imagination of people who didn't know me, didn't know this land, and didn't care about the life I had built here. I picked up the phone and made my first call to a lawyer. If this was going to be a fight, I would need every advantage I could muster. But beneath the anger and the legal strategy forming in my mind, a stubborn seed of determination took root. I hadn't come this far to be bullied by letters and signatures I had never made. The sun dipped behind the hills, casting long shadows across the ranch. The horses nickered softly as if sensing my turmoil. Somewhere in that quiet, I realized that my dream ranch wasn't just a place of peace. It had just become the battlefield for something much bigger than I had anticipated, and I was ready to defend it. The next morning, I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee that had long gone cold, staring at the letter from the HOA. The bold $88,000 seemed to glare back at me, taunting me like a debt I'd never made. I had moved here for peace, for open skis and quiet mornings, not for more paperwork and corporate nonsense. But I wasn't the kind of man who ignored problems. I faced them. So I called the number listed on the letter. A woman answered, her voice sharp and efficient, the kind that made you sit a little straighter even though she wasn't in the room. Homeowners Association of Clear Valley Estates, she said, her tone more robotic than friendly. This is Michael Weller, I replied, keeping my voice even. I received a notice about back dues. I think there's been a mistake. A pause, then the sound of keys clacking on a keyboard. Weller Ranch, correct. Lot 214C. That's right. You're listed as a member of our managed community, effective the date of purchase. The balance is accurate. Managed community, I repeated. My deed doesn't mention any HOA. I bought this ranch outright, private property. No association, no shared roads, nothing. Pause. Our records show the property was incorporated into Clear Valley Estates in 1996. Membership is mandatory. That word mandatory hit me like a slap. I'd like copies of whatever documents prove that, I said firmly. 2 days later, a large brown envelope arrived, heavy and overstuffed. When I tore it open, a thick stack of papers tumbled onto the table. It looked like a miniature encyclopedia, hundreds of pages of legal jargon, clauses, subclauses, fines, and fees. Every page was dense with ink, designed to confuse, to exhaust, to make anyone who tried to understand it give up. The first page read, Clear Valley Estates Homeowners Association Bylaws, revised 2014. I flipped through the pages, my eyes scanning the ridiculous list of violations. Unapproved exterior paint colors, $1,000 fine. Unauthorized livestock count exceeding community ratio, $500 per animal. Non-regulation barn roof pitch, $3,000. Fence style inconsistent with neighborhood aesthetic, $250 per foot of fencing. Failure to maintain HOA-approved mailbox structure, $400. I stopped reading halfway through, anger boiling beneath my calm. I had never agreed to any of this. There were no neighborhood aesthetics here, just open land, scattered ranches, and dirt roads. The nearest neighbor was half a mile away. Yet somehow, this HOA was claiming dominion over all of it, like some modern-day feudal lord. The deeper I read, the clearer it became that the system was designed not to maintain community standards but to drain pockets. There were special assessment fees, administrative handling charges, and retroactive compliance dues. It was a labyrinth of fine print, and every path led to the same destination: more money for them. By the time I reached the last section, my hands were shaking not from fear, but from fury. A clause buried near the end caught my attention. The association reserves the right to amend these bylaws without homeowner consent, effective immediately upon internal board approval. That single line said it all. They could change the rules whenever they wanted, and there was nothing anyone could do about it. I pushed the stack of papers away and leaned back, staring at the ceiling. This wasn't incompetence, it was a racket. That night, I opened my laptop and began digging. The first thing I found was the HOA's financial filings, public documents, though buried deep on the county website. I downloaded every one I could find. Their budgets were full of inconsistencies. Annual maintenance projects with no records of work done. Legal expenses that spiked without explanation. Even payments made to companies that, when I looked them up, didn't exist anymore or never had. By midnight, my screen was filled with notes, names, and connections. The same 3 signatures appeared on almost every expenditure authorization: James Delroy, President; Cynthia Hargrove, Treasurer; and Nathan Crow, Legal Advisor. I searched them individually. Delroy owned a construction company that had supposedly repaired several community facilities, yet there were no receipts, no pictures, no permits. Hargrove had been cited twice for tax irregularities, though both cases had mysteriously been closed. And Crow, the attorney, had represented over a dozen HOAs in similar lawsuits across the state, all of which ended in settlements sealed by confidentiality clauses. I sat there, the glow of the monitor painting the room in pale blue light. The pattern was unmistakable. This wasn't just mismanagement, it was organized greed. The more I dug, the deeper it went. I found complaints on forums, threads from homeowners who'd lost thousands, even their homes, over disputes with the same association. One post caught my eye. They'll say your property is part of their jurisdiction, even if it's not. They've done it before. They'll file liens, drag you to court, and bury you in fees until you give up. My stomach turned. That night I barely slept. I kept hearing the wind against the windows, the creak of the barn outside. Every sound felt sharper, heavier. The land that had felt like my dream now felt threatened, as if invisible lines were being drawn across it, not with fences or wires, but with paper, signatures, and greed. The next morning I drove into town. The county clerk's office was a squat brick building on Main Street, smelling faintly of dust and old coffee. I requested the original land records, the chain of ownership, the deeds, any filings connected to my property. An older clerk, her glasses perched low on her nose, thumbed through the computer and frowned. "That's odd," she said quietly. "Your property was never officially annexed into Clear Valley Estates. There's no county record of it." I froze. "What do you mean?" She turned the monitor toward me. "It's listed as unincorporated land, always has been. Whatever the HOA claiming, it isn't here." A chill ran through me, so the HOA wasn't just greedy, they were lying. As I walked out of the clerk's office, a plan began to form. If they wanted to play games, I'd play smarter. I would collect every piece of evidence, every document, every witness statement I could find. They wanted to bleed me dry, but they had underestimated one thing. I wasn't just another homeowner. I was an engineer by trade, methodical, patient, relentless, and I had no intention of letting anyone steal what I'd built. As the sun dipped low that evening, I stood on my porch, the thick binder of HOA rules in my hands. I flipped through the pages once more, the paper rustling like whispers in the wind. Each word represented a trap, a lie dressed up as law. "Not anymore," I muttered. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of pine and dust. My ranch stretched before me, my land, my freedom. And now it had a new purpose. They wanted a fight. They were about to get one. The letter had burned a hole in my thoughts for days. Every time I looked out across my land, my hills, my fences, my barn, that number, $88,000, echoed in my mind like an accusation I didn't deserve. By the time I received the notice about the mandatory HOA board meeting, I was ready. The invitation was printed on glossy paper with an embossed gold seal, as if prestige could mask corruption. Attendance required for all members in arrears. The tone was smug even on paper. The meeting was scheduled for Thursday evening at the Clear Valley Community Center, a modern-looking building near the edge of the so-called estates. It sat in a neat little cul-de-sac lined with nearly identical homes, manicured lawns, painted fences, and motion lights that flicked on at the slightest breeze. It was everything my ranch was, everything I'd left the city to escape. I arrived early. My boots echoed against the polished tile as I stepped inside. The air smelled faintly of disinfectant and lemon polish, clean, artificial, perfect. At the far end of the room sat a long mahogany table, surrounded by 5 people in pressed suits and smiles that didn't reach their eyes. A banner behind them read, Clear Valley ESTATES HOMEOWNERS Association, upholding community excellence since 1993. My jaw tightened. The man at the center, tanned, silver-haired, wearing a navy suit that screamed power, looked up from his papers. "Mr. Weller," he said with a politician's practiced warmth, "we're so glad you could join us. Please have a seat." "That's James Delray, our president," a woman beside him said with a honeyed smile. "I'm Cynthia Hargrove, treasurer." I recognized both names from my research. The others introduced themselves, a secretary, an accountant, and finally their so-called legal advisor, Nathan Crow. Crow's eyes were small, sharp, and far too observant. "I didn't sit. I won't take much of your time," I began. "I'm here because I received a notice claiming I owe $88,000 in back dues to your association. I've reviewed my purchase documents, and there's no mention of Clear Valley Estates anywhere in my deed or title." Delray smiled thinly, tapping his pen against the table. "That's standard," he said. "All properties within our geographic boundary are automatically subject to community covenants, whether explicitly stated in the deed or not. The original developers registered that framework decades ago." I slid a printed copy of the county land record across the table. "That's odd," I said, "because according to the county clerk's office, my land was never incorporated into Clear Valley Estates. In fact, your jurisdiction ends half a mile south of my property line." Delray's smile faltered, only slightly, but I caught it. Crow cleared his throat. "There may have been administrative overlap," he said smoothly, "but the board reserves the right to retroactively assess compliance and fees when properties are brought into alignment with community standards." "In plain English," I said, folding my arms, "you can just decide someone belongs to your HOA whenever it suits you and bill them for it." A tense silence filled the room. Cynthia leaned forward, her bracelets clinking softly. "Mr. Weller, you're misunderstanding the purpose of the HOA. We ensure the community maintains value and order. We've spent years building a reputation of excellence here. Everyone contributes, it's only fair." I stared at her. "I didn't move here to join a club. I moved here for peace, not to fund your excellence." Her smile vanished. Delray's pen stopped tapping. "You're new here," he said, his tone hardening. "Perhaps you don't realize how things work in Clear Valley. We've handled many cases like this. It's better for everyone if you just settle the balance and move forward." I pulled another sheet from my folder, a list of alleged violations. "Let's talk about these," I said. "Half of them are dated before I bought the property. You fined me for unapproved fencing in 2019. I didn't own the ranch until 2024. And this one," I tapped the page. "Failure to attend HOA meetings from 2020 to 2023. That's impressive, considering I was still living in Chicago." A few people shifted uncomfortably. Delray leaned back in his chair, his smile returning, though tighter this time. Clerical errors, nothing to get worked up about. We'll correct them once your account is current. So, I said slowly, you'll only fix your mistakes after I pay you $88,000 for something I don't owe. The air thickened. Crow interjected with lawyerly calm. Mr. Weller, let's be reasonable. Non-payment could result in a lien against your property. Legal costs, court fees, those numbers can escalate quickly. I'd hate to see this become unpleasant. There it was, the threat behind the charm. I smiled. You'll have to excuse me, but I've read your bylaws. You have no authority to impose liens on non-member properties. In fact, I said, pulling out another document, if you attempt to, it qualifies as fraudulent claim filing under State Code 1247B. Crow's eyes narrowed. The secretary glanced at Delray, whispering something under her breath. I couldn't hear the words, but I saw the nervous flick of her pen. For the first time, the board looked less like a wall of confidence, and more like a group of cornered salesmen. Mr. Weller, Delray said finally, his voice low and measured, I can see you're passionate, but this sort of antagonism won't get you far in Clear Valley. You'll find that cooperation, not confrontation, is the best way forward. I'm sure that's worked on everyone else, I said, but not me. A beat of silence passed. Then I gathered my documents, slid them back into my folder, and straightened. You've built an empire on intimidation and confusion, but I don't scare easily, so if you want to test this, go ahead. Just know I've documented everything. As I turned to leave, Delray's voice followed me. Be careful, Mr. Weller, we have a long memory here. I paused at the door and looked back at him. So do I. Outside, the night air hit me like a breath of freedom. The stars were sharp against the dark sky, and for the first time since I'd moved in, I realized what I was truly up against. These people weren't just petty bureaucrats. They were parasites, organized, practiced, and confident that no one would challenge them. I sat in my truck for a long while, watching the building's lights through the windshield. I could see their silhouettes moving behind the curtains, probably laughing, probably already plotting their next move. But they'd made a mistake. They'd shown me who they really were. As I drove back toward my ranch, the road wound through quiet fields, the headlights slicing through the mist. My anger had cooled into something sharper, resolve. I wasn't just defending my land anymore. I was exposing something rotten that had likely destroyed lives before mine. When I reached the ranch, I stepped out and looked over the dark horizon. My barn, my fences, my home, all of it gleamed faintly under the moonlight. It didn't feel like a simple property anymore. It felt like a fortress. A cause. I knew they would come after me again with letters, lawyers, threats. But I also knew something they didn't. I had truth on my side, and once that light hit their shadows, there'd be no hiding left. That night I made a promise to myself. I wasn't just going to fight them. I was going to dismantle them piece by piece, paper by paper, lie by lie. And when it was over, Clear Valley Estates would regret ever sending me that letter. Hiring a lawyer was the first real step from frustration into action. I wanted someone who wasn't intimidated by paper shields and pompous bureaucrats in blazers. After asking around, I found Ellen Marsh, a sharp, unflappable real estate attorney who had taken on HOAs before and won. When she walked into my ranch office for the first time, she didn't waste time with small talk. She dropped her briefcase on the table, opened her laptop, and said, "All right, Mr. Weller. Tell me everything." I did. Every letter, every meeting, every smug smirk from Delray. When I finished, she sat back, silent for a long moment, her pen tapping rhythmically against her notepad. "They're bluffing," she finally said. "But they've done this before. That's the dangerous part." Her voice was calm, but her eyes were alert, sharp with suspicion. A week later, Ellen introduced me to Thomas Greer, a private investigator who used to work as a county records officer. He had the look of someone who didn't scare easily, gray hair, weathered hands, and an expression that said he'd seen too much nonsense in his life to be impressed by small-town corruption. "If there's dirt, I'll find it," he promised, flipping open a leather-bound notebook. And with HOAs, there's always dirt. We started with the basics: property filings, county land maps, tax histories, and old development records. The county office had shelves stacked with boxes of documents that hadn't been digitized yet. Dust coated everything. Thomas moved through them like he was reading a familiar language. I watched him pull old survey maps, squint at faded ink, and shake his head. "See this," he said, pointing at one document. "Your parcel line never been amended. The HOA's claim of annexation. Fabricated, they must have forged the map overlay or filed it quietly with an inside contact." My stomach tightened. "So they're manufacturing legal coverage," he nodded grimly. "Looks that way." Ellen began dissecting their finances. She filed for public disclosure of the HOA's annual budget, something every nonprofit board was legally obligated to provide. It took 2 weeks and several angry phone calls before Cynthia, the treasurer, reluctantly sent over a digital file. It was laughably incomplete. Entire sections were blacked out or redacted, expenses marked simply as administrative operations or legal retainers. But Ellen was relentless. She cross-referenced those vague entries with state tax documents, and the pattern was unmistakable. Tens of thousands of dollars funneled to shell companies registered under similar names. One of them stood out: Clearview Development Partners, LLC. Its registered agent, none other than James Delray. Another, C&H Property Management, was under Cynthia's husband's name. The HOA board wasn't just enforcing rules, they were using them to manipulate property turnover. When a homeowner fell behind on dues, they'd face foreclosure or forced sale. The HOA would then purchase the property at a fraction of its value through one of these shell entities. It was a closed loop of exploitation. The deeper we dug, the uglier it got. Thomas unearthed old lawsuits, 7 to be exact, filed over the past 15 years. Every one of them followed the same pattern: a homeowner accused of noncompliance, a lien placed, foreclosure initiated, settlement sealed. None of the victims spoke publicly. They'd either moved away or vanished from public records altogether. "It's a racket," Ellen said one evening as we reviewed everything on my kitchen table. The evidence lay in piles: photocopies, screenshots, receipts. A sophisticated one. They use the HOA as a front for flipping undervalued properties, and when they're challenged, they weaponize procedure. I leaned back in my chair, the weight of it all pressing down. "So, what's our next move?" Ellen smiled faintly. "We don't rush. We build this case like a house, brick by brick, document by document." Over the next month, my life turned into an investigation headquarters. The ranch office was buried in binders and sticky notes. The sound of the printer was constant. We traced money flows, uncovered missing tax filings, even interviewed a former HOA secretary who had quit under suspicious circumstances. She met us in a diner outside of town, nervous and glancing over her shoulder every few seconds. "You didn't hear this from me," she said, voice low, "but Delray's been paying himself consulting bonuses from HOA funds, thousands every quarter, and whenever anyone questioned him, they got hit with fines or violations until they shut up." She looked around again, then whispered, "He's got people inside the county office too. They sign off on filings no one reviews." Thomas nodded slowly. "Makes sense. That's how they keep their paper trail clean." The walls of my office became a war map. Photos of Delray, Cynthia, and Crow pinned alongside property documents and arrows connecting dates, companies, and case numbers. The more connections I made, the more the rage inside me focused into something sharper, a sense of strategy. I wasn't just going to expose them. I was going to dismantle their entire operation piece by piece. But I had to move carefully. One wrong move and they'd hit back hard. Ellen reminded me that these people thrived on intimidation. They'll start with letters, maybe even threats. Don't respond emotionally. Let them think they're still in control. And they did. Within a week, I started receiving reminder notices, this time claiming my balance had increased due to late fees and interest accrual. Another letter warned that further resistance may result in legal escalation. Each envelope was a new attempt to corner me, but now, instead of fear, I felt something else, calm defiance. I filed every piece, date-stamped and documented. Every line of text was another bullet point for my growing case file. Ellen began drafting what she called the counterpunch, a comprehensive legal notice demanding proof of jurisdiction, certified audits, and board member disclosures. It was a direct challenge to their legitimacy. "This isn't just about your ranch anymore," she told me. "If we pull this off, we expose a statewide scam." Thomas, meanwhile, was digging into the personal lives of the board members. He found Delry's private lake house, paid for in cash. Cynthia's second property registered in her cousin's name. Crow's connections to a law firm that specialized in asset recovery from foreclosed homes, the very homes their HOA had seized. Every discovery made my resolve harden. These people weren't guardians of community values. They were predators disguised as neighbors. By late autumn, the air had turned sharp and cold. The ranch was quiet at night, but my thoughts weren't. I'd stand outside, looking at the stars above the hills, and think about how close I'd come to being another one of their victims. It made me wonder how many others had suffered in silence, buried under legal jargon and fabricated debt. That's when I decided I wouldn't just defend myself, I'd make sure they could never do this to anyone again. I began outlining a long-term strategy, one that went beyond lawsuits. I wanted the county, the state, and the media to see what these people had done. But for now, we had to be patient, calculated, invisible. Every day brought new revelations, new proof. And with every document we uncovered, I could feel the board's arrogance crumbling, even if they didn't know it yet. They thought they were dealing with just another landowner, another target too naive to fight back. But I was watching their every move, dissecting their every lie. The investigation had begun as self-defense. Now it was a crusade. And before it ended, every single one of them, Delry, Cynthia, Crow, would wish they'd never heard my name. I realized that charging into battle too early would only drain me. The HOA thrived on chaos, on forcing homeowners into panic, frustration, and costly mistakes. I wasn't going to give them that satisfaction. So instead of filing a lawsuit right away, I began my quiet counterattack. Every morning, before the sun had fully burned away the mist that lingered over the fields, I walked the boundaries of my ranch. I took photographs, time-stamped, geotagged, and saved to multiple drives. Every fence post, every barn beam, every blade of grass that could possibly be questioned was documented. I recorded water quality, livestock feed logs, and even the brand of paint used on the barn. If they wanted a fight about compliance, they'd be facing a fortress of evidence. The HOA handbook, thick as a brick, became my new bedtime reading. Page after page of vague, self-serving language, clauses that seemed designed to confuse more than clarify. I highlighted, bookmarked, and annotated. Some rules contradicted others outright. One section prohibited livestock sheds, visible from neighboring properties, while another required animal shelter within 100 feet of residence. They couldn't even obey their own logic. I planned to use every contradiction against them. I started noticing patterns. Every letter I'd received had been signed by the same name, Marjorie Kent, the HOA's treasurer. When I searched property records, her name appeared again, on 3 different lots sold over the past 5 years, all bought at foreclosed prices after owners failed to pay HOA fines. She wasn't just enforcing rules, she was profiting from them. That discovery hardened my resolve. I bought a small drone and began flying it along the property edges. The footage didn't just capture my land, it revealed something more. On the far edge of the development, the HOA had authorized construction that clearly violated their own community environmental regulations. There were illegal drainage channels redirecting runoff into protected wetland areas. Ironically, the very people accusing me of noncompliance were breaking the law themselves. I collected the data quietly, never letting them see me coming. Every time they sent a warning letter, I replied politely with precise documentation, pages of receipts, time-stamped photos, and notarized affidavits. Their tone started to shift. The arrogance in their words gave way to irritation. They weren't used to resistance, especially not resistance that looked this clean and calculated. But I didn't stop there. I began attending more meetings, sitting in the back quietly, listening. Most homeowners were frustrated but too exhausted to fight. They complained about random fines, surprise dues, and the way the HOA revised its rules every few months. Yet none of them had the time, money, or nerve to challenge the board. That was when I realized I wasn't just fighting for my own ranch. I was exposing something systemic. I reached out to a few of the other property owners individually, carefully, without stirring rumors. Over coffee, I shared copies of the documents I had uncovered, duplicated charges, overlapping maintenance fees, emergency assessments that were never legally approved. Their eyes widened. Some of them had lost thousands. One elderly couple told me they'd almost lost their home when the HOA doubled their dues overnight. That night, I knew this wasn't going to be a private dispute anymore. It was becoming something bigger. I kept my communications minimal, emails with calm, professional language. I knew they'd try to twist my words or bait me into emotional outbursts. Instead, my replies were models of composure. Per your request, please find attached photographic evidence dated April 3rd confirming compliance with Section 8.1a. Every letter I sent was a small blade, precise and deliberate. My lawyer advised patience. They're digging their own hole, he said. You're just handing them the shovel. And he was right. Each contradictory demand they issued only strengthened my case. When they fined me $2,000 for an unauthorized barn expansion, I sent them the county permit, approved 2 years before my ownership, and CC'd the county planning department. Within a week, they quietly withdrew the fine. Behind the scenes, my investigator continued to gather data. He found that the HOA had failed to renew its own business registration on time. Technically, for nearly 6 months, it had been operating without legal authority to collect or enforce dues. That alone could nullify all the debts they were trying to impose. I kept that card close to my chest, waiting for the right moment. By late summer, the board's tone had changed completely. Their letters became shorter, their meetings less smug. The once dominant president, a man named Reeves, avoided eye contact when I attended sessions. The tension in the room was palpable, like a predator realizing it had misjudged its prey. Meanwhile, I turned my ranch into a showcase of compliance. Every improvement was not only within the rules but beyond them. Freshly painted fences, labeled bins for waste, manicured trails, all documented and timed. It looked less like a home and more like a legal exhibit waiting for its audience. But the silence wasn't just for them, it was strategy. I wanted them to underestimate me just enough to make one final, irreversible mistake. And deep down, I knew they would. Power-hungry people always do. As fall approached, I began preparing my next move. I wasn't just going to defend myself. I was going to make them answer for every homeowner they'd bullied, every fraudulent fee they'd imposed. I was gathering allies quietly, one conversation at a time. The ranch had once been a dream, then a burden, and now an armory. Every corner of it held proof, strategy, and purpose. The hills that once symbolized peace now stood as witnesses. I no longer looked at my land as a sanctuary but as ground zero for justice. And as the first leaf turned amber and drifted to the ground, I knew the quiet phase of this war was nearly over. The HOA thought I'd been silent because I was scared. But silence, when deliberate, is the loudest warning of all. The morning I filed the lawsuit, the air felt heavier than usual, as though the clouds themselves were waiting to see what would happen. I stood outside the county courthouse, the papers in my hand trembling not from fear, but from the sheer weight of what they represented. Months of research, late-night reading, quiet observation, and strategic patience had led to this moment. I wasn't just defending my ranch anymore. I was taking a stand against a system built on arrogance and exploitation. My lawyer, a calm and precise woman named Dana Marsh, handed the clerk the thick stack of documents we had assembled. The lawsuit wasn't just about the $88,000 they demanded. It was about the authority they never legally possessed. "You ready for what comes next?" she asked as we stepped out into the sunlight. I nodded. I'd been ready since the first letter arrived. Within a week, the storm hit. The HOA's legal team responded with the fury of a wounded animal. They filed motions to dismiss, counterclaims accusing me of public defamation and disrupting community harmony. Their lawyers came from a prestigious firm in the city, sleek suits, expensive watches, rehearsed smiles. They assumed I'd crumble under the pressure, that I was just another homeowner out of his depth. But what they didn't realize was that I'd spent months building a defense so airtight it could suffocate every one of their claims. The first hearing drew a small crowd. Homeowners I'd quietly spoken with began to appear in the back rows, curious and hopeful. The HOA board sat together at their table, rigid and stone-faced. I recognized their treasurer, Marjorie Kent, whispering to the attorneys. The smug confidence she'd worn at meetings was still there, but thinner now, cracked at the edges. Our opening argument was simple. I had never signed any agreement binding me to their rules. The HOA's own incorporation documents, when examined, revealed that the boundaries of their jurisdiction had been redrawn illegally years earlier. They'd added properties to their control without proper owner consent, a violation of state real estate law. The judge's eyebrows lifted slightly as Dana explained that their so-called community map didn't even match the original county filings. The HOA's lawyers countered with grand statements about collective responsibility and upholding community values. They painted me as a rebel homeowner trying to undermine local governance. But when they were pressed for documentation, actual signatures, contracts, or filed amendments, they fumbled. Their binder was full of vague policy summaries and unsigned drafts. Every session that followed became a chess match. Dana was methodical, calm, never rattled. I sat beside her, watching the board members squirm as our evidence was introduced piece by piece. Photographs, emails, audit records, it was all there. We showed how fines were fabricated, how dues had been adjusted based on personal favoritism, how Marjorie herself had purchased foreclosed homes under her son's name after forcing out previous owners. Then came the financial audits. That was the day their facade truly cracked. Our investigators' report showed thousands of dollars missing from HOA accounts, reclassified as maintenance expenses that had never occurred. The board president's face turned a shade of gray as Dana laid out the timeline, connecting each withdrawal to a private contractor company owned by his cousin. The courtroom murmured. I could see the fear forming in their eyes. They had walked into the courtroom believing they could intimidate me into settling. Instead, every document I produced pulled another thread from their carefully woven illusion of authority. Outside of court, the HOA tried to rally community support against me. They sent newsletters claiming my lawsuit was draining community funds and hurting property values. I responded by releasing public records showing how they had been draining funds long before I ever filed. Local media caught wind. A small article appeared in the county paper. Homeowner challenges HOA over unlawful dues. What started as a personal battle was now attracting attention. The board's lawyers shifted strategies. They began offering settlements first quietly, then urgently. "If you agree to drop the case," one letter read, "we will forgive all alleged dues and consider the matter closed." But I refused. This wasn't about a bill anymore. It was about justice for me and for everyone they'd bullied. I wanted their entire operation exposed, not erased with a payoff. Stretched into months, the courtroom became my second home. I learned the rhythm of hearings, the way silence carried power when used correctly. Each time the HOA's lawyers tried to twist the narrative, Dana countered with hard evidence. The judge began to lose patience with their evasions. Once, during cross-examination, Marjorie was asked directly, "Can you produce a signed document proving the plaintiff agreed to HOA jurisdiction?" Her answer was hesitant, her voice barely above a whisper. "No." "But it's implied." The courtroom erupted in whispers. Implied authority doesn't hold up in law. Behind the scenes, I continued my quiet campaign. More homeowners came forward with stories of wrongful fines, arbitrary enforcement, and financial coercion. We gathered statements and built a parallel case for class action potential. The board began fracturing internally, some members resigning, others turning on each other. The once invincible HOA was rotting from within. During one particularly tense session, Dana handed me a note. "We have them cornered." The county assessor's office had just confirmed that the HOA's boundary expansion, the one they used to claim my ranch, was never legally recorded. It was void. Every dollar they'd collected from properties like mine was illegal. The final blow came during discovery when the court ordered them to produce all internal emails related to fee assessments. Buried among them was a message from Marjorie to the president, sent just weeks before I received my first notice. "New owner on the West Ranch. Wealthy by the looks of it. Let's audit and apply back dues. Easy revenue." When that email was read aloud in court, the silence was absolute. Even the judge looked disgusted. The HOA's lawyers tried to object, claiming it was taken out of context, but the damage was done. Their greed had been documented in their own words. After the session ended, I walked out of the courthouse into the cool autumn air. The sun was setting, spilling gold across the courthouse steps. I should have felt triumphant, but what I felt was calmer, like the first deep breath after a storm. This wasn't over yet, but the tide had turned. That night, I returned to the ranch and stood on the porch, staring out at the rolling fields. The land was silent, peaceful, untouched by the chaos I'd faced. Somewhere in the darkness, the faint sound of horses moved like a heartbeat. I realized something important then. This fight had never been about land or money. It was about reclaiming dignity. The HOA had built its empire on fear and manipulation, but now every piece of evidence was out in the open. The judge had scheduled the next hearing for final arguments. The board would try one last desperate defense, I knew, but I was ready for that, because no matter how powerful they seemed, I had already learned their greatest weakness. They relied on silence, and I had already broken that. The courtroom became a second battleground, sterile, echoing, heavy with anticipation. Every day I sat behind my lawyer's desk, a quiet observer in a storm of legal theatrics. Across the aisle, the HOA board gathered in a tight cluster, Marjorie with her sharp suits and tighter smile, the president with his jaw locked in nervous defiance. Their attorneys filled the benches, stacking thick binders of paperwork that meant little compared to the truth I carried. When the first day of testimony began, the air was tense. The judge, an older man with a calm but piercing gaze, reminded everyone that decorum and honesty were expected. I caught the faintest glimmer of irony in his tone. He had clearly seen enough HOA disputes to know honesty was rarely their strong suit. Dana, my attorney, began by methodically presenting the evidence. "Your Honor," she said, "this case is not about fees, it's about authority. The plaintiff never consented to HOA governance, and yet the defendants imposed retroactive dues totaling $88,000. She moved slowly, placing copies of my deed, closing documents, and title transfer into evidence. Nowhere does it mention HOA jurisdiction. The defense objected, claiming implied consent through property location. The judge leaned forward. "Implied," he repeated, his tone sharp. "That's a weak foundation for an $88,000 demand." The first crack appeared in their composure right then. As the hearings progressed, the courtroom filled with onlookers. Homeowners who had once whispered their frustrations now sat shoulder to shoulder, notebooks in hand, waiting for vindication. Local reporters began attending too, small-town papers hungry for drama, but also justice. Then came the documents. Page after page of internal HOA emails, unearthed through discovery, revealed the rot beneath their polished exterior. One thread discussed how new buyers make the best revenue opportunities. Another mentioned inflating retroactive assessments to test payment compliance. They weren't enforcing community rules, they were running an extortion racket. The defense's lead attorney tried to brush it off as misinterpretation of administrative language. Dana stood, unflinching. Administrative language, she said slowly, does not include targeting homeowners for profit. She handed the judge a highlighted copy of one particularly damning line from Marjorie's own correspondence. "We should hit the new ranch buyer early. He seems well off, less likely to fight." The courtroom was silent. The judge read the sentence twice before looking directly at Marjorie. "Did you write this?" he asked. Her lawyer objected immediately, but she hesitated, and that hesitation was all anyone needed to see. I remained still, emotionless, though inside, every nerve buzzed with vindication. Months of quiet preparation, all the late nights cataloging documents, all the hours walking my property line with a camera, it was finally paying off. As the trial days unfolded, more witnesses took the stand. A former HOA accountant testified under oath that she had resigned after noticing irregular withdrawals. She described how funds labeled for road repairs and maintenance reserves had been redirected to shell companies linked to board members' relatives. "It didn't feel right," she said, her voice shaking. "But when I questioned it, they threatened to blacklist me from other neighborhood contracts." The defense tried to discredit her, claiming personal grievance, but Dana was ready. She produced a copy of the accountant's resignation letter dated the same week as a mysterious $15,000 consulting fee paid to Marjorie's cousin's company. The judge raised an eyebrow. "Convenient timing," he said dryly. I took the stand on the fourth day. The courtroom seemed to shrink around me. The defense tried to intimidate, asking rapid-fire questions about property boundaries, zoning, and supposed violations. But I had prepared for this moment meticulously. "Mr. Weller," the defense lawyer said, smirking, "would you agree that community standards are beneficial for property value?" "I would agree," I said calmly, "if they were applied legally and equally. But targeting new residents and fabricating dues isn't about value, it's about greed." Dana smiled faintly beside me. The defense attorney tried again, this time waving a photo of my barn. "Is this your structure?" "Yes," I replied. "And you admit it was repainted without board approval?" "I repainted it," I said evenly, "under a county-issued permit which this board had no authority to approve or deny. That's already in evidence as Exhibit 42. He glanced at his notes, visibly thrown off. The judge's pen scratched against his pad, likely nodding the point in my favor. By the fifth hearing, the balance of power had shifted. The defense, once smug and dismissive, was now scrambling. Their motions were denied one after another. Their own witnesses contradicted each other. One maintenance contractor, under cross-examination, admitted that invoices were sometimes inflated to cover unrelated expenses. When asked by what percentage, he mumbled, 20 to 30%, maybe more. The gasp that spread through the courtroom was audible. The HOA's president tried to maintain his composure, but the sweat on his forehead betrayed him. Marjorie's smile had long since disappeared, replaced by tight-lipped silence. The board's remaining members avoided her gaze entirely. They knew what was coming. When Dana delivered her closing arguments, her voice was steady but firm. The defendants used their positions not to serve their community but to exploit it. They imposed unlawful dues, falsified audits, and harassed property owners into submission. My client did not bend. He documented, he complied, he followed every rule they wrote, and he exposed their hypocrisy through their own records. She paused, looking straight at the judge. "This is not just a legal dispute. It's a case study in abuse of power." The defense tried a last-minute plea for leniency, arguing that dissolution of the HOA would harm the neighborhood's stability. The judge simply responded, "Stability built on corruption is not stability, it's control." His gavel struck once. Case adjourned until ruling. As we left the courthouse that day, I could feel eyes following me. Some were hopeful, others curious, a few resentful, but most were tired of being afraid. People began approaching me quietly in the hallways, thanking me for standing up when they couldn't. "You're doing this for all of us," one woman whispered as she shook my hand. I didn't have an answer then, but her words stayed with me. That evening, as I sat on my porch, watching the horizon bleed into the colors of dusk, I replayed every moment in my mind. The evidence was undeniable. The HOA's foundation had been ripped apart in plain view. Still, I knew better than to celebrate too soon. Powerful people rarely accepted defeat gracefully. The next session would bring the verdict, a decision that could dissolve the HOA entirely, invalidate their debts, and expose their officers to criminal liability. I leaned back in my chair, the sound of crickets filling the air, and let out a slow breath. The balance of power had shifted, yes, but not by chance. It shifted because, for once, truth had been documented, organized, and spoken aloud without fear. The HOA had built its empire on intimidation, but I had built my defense on patience. And in that courtroom, patience had proven stronger than fear. The judge ruled in my favor. Not only was I absolved of the $88,000, but the HOA was ordered to refund some fees collected illegally from other residents. Board members faced investigations, and the HOA's power in the county diminished overnight. With my ranch finally secure, I restored the barns and pastures. Neighbors came by to congratulate me, some quietly relieved, others inspired. The land, my freedom, and my dream were safe. I realized patience, meticulous planning, and knowing your rights were more powerful than money or intimidation. The ranch had survived, and so had I.